Welcome back to our course on inflammation. Today we're going to talk about some of the foods that we're consuming that are increasing our inflammation. But before I get into that, I just want to reiterate a couple of things about what inflammation is. We know that there are 4 fats in the body today: brown fat, white fat, subcutaneous fat, and visceral fat. So brown fat is the fat that we find in our shoulder blades, and it allows our body to stay warm when necessary. Babies are born with lots of brown fat, and this is why they're a little bit on the chubby side. And you can increase your brown fat by going out in the wintertime, skating or snowmobiling, and you get chilly and it turns on. Then there is the subcutaneous fat. That's the fat that we can find around our waistline at the side of our pants. There's no problem with subcutaneous fat. It is unsightly, but it's not dangerous at all. Then you have white fat, and that's the fat you use for extra energy. You see, if you work out at the gym, you're going to use the energy from your muscles, then the energy from your liver, and then you're going to go into the source of your white fat. So you won't burn muscle before you burn fat. But the most dangerous fat of all is called visceral fat. You see, visceral fat is the fat that we find around our waistline. The problem is it surrounds our heart, our lungs, our kidneys, and our pancreas, and it releases a hormone into a protein into our body called cytokines. And the cytokines are there to amplify, to direct, to mediate, and to regulate our immune system. But when you have too many cytokines, this is going to cause tissue damage. And we know things like arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, eczema are all when we have too many of these inflammatory markers in the body. And the reason, or how we know we've got too much of this visceral fat, well, all you have to do is take a measuring tape and take it around your belly button. If you're a female and your belly button measures more than 35 inches, or if you're a male and it measures more than 40 inches, you have too much visceral fat. The problem is today, we have a lot of people experiencing obesity, diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, and even blood lipid disorders. These are all a sign that you have too much inflammation. And often we overlook it and we don't pay attention to it. And one of the ways we're going to know that is if you go, and we're going to talk about in another video, how you can know exactly if you have too much inflammation of the visceral fat in the body. But there are foods that can increase our inflammation in the body. Remember, we live in a world where burger is the king and dairy is the queen. We have the 5 new food groups: frozen, fast, fried, junk, and processed. The problem with all of these foods, though, is they're typically beige. They lack water, they lack enzymes, and they lack fiber. So what we're doing today is we're going to talk about the 8 major categories of food that are causing too much inflammation in the body. Now remember, if the red light comes on the dashboard of your car indicating that you need service, you're not going to put a Band-Aid on top of it and ignore it. But we as a society have a tendency to ignore the signs and symptoms of inflammation. And we know some of those signs and symptoms are heat and swollen. So think of a big red balloon, you know there's too much inflammation. So let's talk about all the 8 categories of food that are increasing inflammation and causing a global obesity problem in our world today. We have our fried foods, things like donuts, potato chips, French fries, bagels, muffins, croissants, all of that. Now, the problem with these foods, again, is the processing and the cooking with the oils, because foods that are being cooked in oils are usually oils are being utilized again and again and again, and we'll talk about the vegetable oils, but they're causing the trans fatty acids in the body and releasing too many cytokines. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all about having balance in the body, but you have to remember that there's the 80-20 rule. It's what you do 80% of the time that matters the most. So we don't want our diet being consumed with too much of these fried foods. The next ones are processed foods like the cured meats. The problem with cured meats is there are nitrates, nitrites, they're smoked, they're cured, and they're salted. And we know salt in the body creates too much inflammation and it causes high blood pressure, which is a sign that you have metabolic syndrome, which is a sign of inflammation. Alcohol. Well, we all like to have a drink from time to time. The problem is excessive alcohol leads to leaky gut syndrome. In your small intestine, you have these little hair-like filaments called microvilli. And these microvilli are there in your gut to help you digest and process your food. However, when there's a constant consumption of over drinking alcohol, it damages the lining of your microvilli, and what happens, protein molecules will actually be, they will find their way into the bloodstream, and they will cause a lot of inflammation. So if you have a lot of joint stiffness, you may have a problem with this leaky gut syndrome. And the only way you're going to know if you have leaky gut syndrome, one of the things that I also do is we do live blood cell analysis, and we can see if we have that. Food sensitivities also can follow underneath here too, because food sensitivities can lead to leaky gut syndrome, which is all sign we have too much inflammation. Refined carbohydrates, pasta, white bread, cookies, crackers. Well, here's something for you. The whiter the bread, the faster you're dead. We want to make sure that we're consuming whole live foods. Again, I'm always going to reiterate this, making sure your diet is colorful and it is balanced. You want to make sure that on your plate you've got, your protein, your fats, and your carbs, but that dinner plate should be colorful. So a plate of white rice, some white chicken, and some white noodles is going to be a processed food, and it's not going to give your body with the vitamins, the minerals, and the enzymes. Remember, processed foods lacks a lot of that. Next, we have artificial sweeteners, Splenda, sweet and low, saccharin. These are all neurotoxins, and they pass through the blood-brain barrier, and they can even be known to cause even depression and weight gain because you don't get the signal that you're full. And Splenda in particular does contain 4 chlorine molecules, which can damage your thyroid gland, and you need your thyroid functioning optimally because it regulates your body temperature and your metabolism. If you're looking for an artificial sweetener, I would stay away from them completely, but what you can do is you can use honey, you can use some maple syrup, and you can even use stevia, because stevia is a plant from Paraguay and has a very sweet taste to it. That's one of my favorite ones, is a little bit of stevia in my morning coffee. And remember, it's all about balance, the 80-20 rule is what you do 80% of the time that matters the most. Then we have vegetable oils. Well, vegetable oils have to undergo many processing to get them to be refined. The problem is, if you lined up 8 different vegetable oils, I'm going to guarantee you they're all going to taste exactly the same. They have to degum them, they have to deodorize them, they have to bleach them, and they're cheap and they're inexpensive, and they contain a lot of omega-6s. And remember, your body needs a balance of omega-3, omega-6, and omega-9. And through all of these things, we're consuming too many omega-6s, which is changing the ratio of the proper ratio between omega-3 and omega-6. And omega-3 we need for the brain, and we also need this, we need all of these oils, but you don't want too many omega-6s in your diet. And things like a corn chip is going to have too many omega-6s, and it's going to displace your omega-3s. Remember, you need these good fats in your diet. And then we have high fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup has found its way into everything from ice cream to soda pop to cookies to candies. And when I was growing up, we didn't have foods that contained as much high fructose corn syrup. The problem is they contain something called fructose. Fructose is good, but they're in such high concentrations, your body can't break them down too quickly. So it turns your body, it turns, when you consume it, it turns it into fat very quickly, as your liver can't break down. So you're better off having, instead of a soda pop, a soda water. If you're better off having a fig versus a candy bar. But again, you have to remember it is the 80-20 rule. But we do consume far too much sugar today. Now, when I was growing up too, from grade 0 to grade 8, there were no overweight children. And now you find many children today have a lot of fat hanging over their tummy. This is because they're consuming too much high fructose corn syrup, which is changing the diameter of their waistline, which is causing too much visceral fat, which is causing inflammation. And inflammation, again, is responsible for diabetes, heart disease, cardiovascular problems, and blood lipid disorders. And lastly, we have our salad dressings. Salad dressings, number 1, are loaded with sugar. They're also loaded with salt, and they've been chemically extracted, and they are not the healthy good fats. They have too many omega-6s and not enough of the omega-3s. So there you have it. some of the foods that we can eat and to avoid. But in my next video, I'm going to talk about how do you know if you have inflammation and what are the telltale signs that you can identify it in your body and what you can do for it. So join me next time, and thanks for joining me.